February 24th, 1944. The Anzio beachhead, Italy. Hauptmann Klaus Richter crouched in the rubble of what had been a coastal observation post, watching the night sky through his Zeiss binoculars. For 3 weeks, the Luftwaffe had been bombing Allied positions on this narrow strip of beach with impunity after dark, exploiting the fact that American SCR-2 68 radars could be jammed effectively. Tonight would be different, though Richter did not yet know why. At 2100 hours, 12 Junkers Ju-88 bombers from Kampfgeschwader 76 approached the beachhead at 4,000 meters altitude. Richter watched them pass overhead, confident in their mission. The American anti-aircraft guns would fire blindly into darkness, wasting ammunition while German pilots delivered their payloads with precision. It had been this way for weeks. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Then the American 90mm guns opened fire. But something was wrong. The shells were not scattering randomly across the sky as they had on previous nights. They were exploding in concentrated patterns, boxing in specific aircraft with surgical accuracy. Within 90 seconds, 5 Junkers tumbled from the sky in flames, their crews dead before they understood what had killed them. The remaining aircraft scattered, jettisoning bombs wildly and fleeing north toward their bases. Richter lowered his binoculars, struggling to comprehend what he had witnessed. No searchlights had illuminated the bombers. No tracer fire had corrected the guns onto target. Yet the American batteries had fired as though they could see perfectly through absolute darkness, tracking maneuvering aircraft with impossible precision. "They have something new," he muttered to his radio man. "Something we don't understand." 200 meters away, Technical Sergeant James Morrison stood beside the SCR-584 radar system that had just guided those guns with such devastating effect. The 6-foot parabolic dish antenna rotated smoothly on its trailer-mounted pedestal, tracking targets automatically while feeding continuous data to the M9 gun director computer. Morrison had trained for months on this equipment at Fort Bliss, Texas, but tonight marked his first combat action. The system had performed flawlessly. 5 confirmed kills, Lieutenant Rogers reported, examining the radar scope. The rest broke off and ran. "I don't think they'll be back tomorrow night." Morrison nodded, watching the antenna continue its scanning pattern. He understood what this technology represented, though he doubted the Germans comprehended the implications yet. The SCR-584 was not simply a better radar, it was a glimpse of a different kind of warfare, where electromagnetic mastery mattered more than courage or tactics. What neither Morrison nor Richter fully grasped that night was how profoundly this single engagement would influence German assessments of Allied technological capabilities. Within hours, reports of the catastrophic losses reached Luftwaffe headquarters. Within days, captured Allied equipment and prisoner interrogations would begin revealing the source of American targeting superiority. Within months, German engineers would be forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. They were not losing individual battles due to tactical errors. They were losing the war because American science and industry had achieved things German experts had dismissed as theoretically impossible. The story of how Germany came to understand and fear the SCR-584 began not in Italy, but in the laboratories of Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where in 1940, a group of American scientists were tasked with solving a problem every major power had attempted and failed to master: creating a radar system accurate enough to guide anti-aircraft guns directly onto target without searchlights or optical tracking. The National Defense Research Committee, formed in June 1940 under the leadership of Vannevar Bush, established the Radiation Laboratory at MIT in December of that year. The RAD Lab, as it became known, brought together some of America's most brilliant physicists and engineers with a singular mission: develop microwave radar systems that could give Allied forces decisive technological advantages. Among the dozens of projects undertaken by the RAD Lab, the SCR-584 gun-laying radar would prove to be one of the most strategically significant. The technical challenges were formidable. Existing American radar systems like the SCR-268 operated at wavelengths around 1.5 meters, providing sufficient range for early warning, but lacking the precision needed to guide guns automatically. The beam was too broad, the accuracy too poor, the tracking too slow. German aircraft could maneuver faster than the system could follow them, rendering it useful only for alerting crews to incoming raids, not for providing firing solutions. In September 1940, the British Tizard mission had shared with American researchers one of their most closely guarded secrets: the cavity magnetron, a device capable of generating powerful microwave radiation at 10 centimeter wavelength. This technology, developed at Birmingham University, represented a fundamental breakthrough in radar capabilities. The shorter wavelength allowed for narrower beams, higher resolution, and greater accuracy. American scientists immediately recognized that this technology could enable the automatic gun-laying system they had been unable to develop with longer wavelengths. Alfred Lee Loomis, who ran a private laboratory and served as director of Section Dunn of the National Defense Research Committee, advocated for an entirely automatic tracking system. Previous radars required operators to manually follow targets, a process that introduced delays and errors. Loomis proposed using servo mechanisms, electromechanical systems that could automatically track targets once acquired and keep the antenna pointed at aircraft even during violent maneuvers. This approach would reduce the crew needed to operate the system while dramatically improving tracking accuracy. The RadLab team designed the SCR-584 around a 2-meter parabolic reflector antenna mounted on a trailer for mobility. The system operated in the S-band frequency range between 2,700 and 2,900 MHz, corresponding to wavelengths around 10 to 11 centimeters. It transmitted 300 kilowatt pulses lasting less than 1 microsecond at a pulse repetition frequency of 1,707 pulses per second. The antenna's 4-degree beam width, combined with mechanical pointing accuracy of 0.06 degrees, provided unprecedented angular resolution. The critical innovation was conical scanning, a technique where the radar beam rotated continuously around the antenna's central axis. As the beam swept past a target, the return signal strength would vary, reaching maximum when the beam pointed directly at the aircraft. By analyzing these variations, the system could determine exactly which direction to move the antenna to track the target precisely. Once locked onto an aircraft, servo motors in the antenna mount would automatically adjust pointing direction to keep the target centered in the beam. No human intervention was required. The radar tracked autonomously. To provide firing solutions, Bell Telephone Laboratories developed the M9 Gun Director, an analog computer that worked in coordination with the SCR-584. The radar provided continuous data on target range, azimuth, and elevation. The M9 calculated aircraft speed and course, predicted future position accounting for shell flight time, incorporated corrections for wind, air density, powder temperature, and a dozen other variables. Then output, firing solutions to up to 4 90mm anti-aircraft guns simultaneously. The entire system, from detection to firing solution, operated automatically once the target was acquired. Dr. David Parkinson of Bell Labs, who led development of the M9, had conceived the basic concept in a dream where he envisioned an anti-aircraft gun that aimed itself perfectly. Working with colleagues Clarence Lovell and Edward Wente, Parkinson translated that vision into reality. The M9 used hundreds of vacuum tubes, dozens of motors, and intricate electromechanical components to solve ballistic equations in real time. It weighed over 2,000 pounds and required a dedicated trailer, but it could calculate firing solutions faster and more accurately than any human crew. The first operational SCR-584 systems were delivered in May 1943, though bureaucratic delays prevented them from reaching frontline units until early 1944. Initial deployment came in February 1944 at Anzio, where German forces had been exploiting their ability to jam the older SCR-2 68 radar. 2 complete SCR-584 systems were rushed to the beachhead on February 23 and became operational within 24 hours. The German reaction to the Anzio losses was immediate and alarmed. Kampfgeschwader 76 had been conducting nightly raids on Allied shipping and beachhead positions with acceptable losses. The sudden destruction of nearly half a bomber formation in a single raid suggested catastrophic change in Allied defensive capabilities. Survivors reported that anti-aircraft fire had tracked individual aircraft through violent, evasive maneuvers, something that should have been impossible with known American technology. General Major Wolfgang Martini, Chief of Luftwaffe Signals Intelligence, ordered immediate investigation. As the officer responsible for all German radar development and electronic warfare, Martini understood that the Anzio disaster likely indicated new Allied radar technology. His analysts examined combat reports, interrogated prisoners, and attempted to intercept any Allied radio or radar emissions that might reveal technical details. The initial assessments were troubling. American gunfire accuracy had increased by at least an order of magnitude. Aircraft were being shot down without visual acquisition. The jamming techniques that had defeated SCR-2 68 systems appeared completely ineffective against whatever new system the Americans had deployed. What made the situation more concerning was that German radar technology had been considered among the world's finest. The Freya early warning radar, operating at wavelengths around 2.4 meters, could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 kilometers. The Würzburg gun-laying radar, with its 3-meter parabolic reflector operating at 60-centimeter wavelength, provided accuracy sufficient to guide anti-aircraft fire and night fighters. These systems had given Germany significant advantages during the Battle of Britain and the early war years. The Kammhuber line, Germany's defensive network across Western Europe, relied on Freya and Würzburg radars, working in coordination to create an effective air defense system. But the Würzburg, despite its sophistication, operated at 53 centimeters wavelength. The beam width, even with the enlarged Würzburg Riese model using a 7-meter dish, was broader than what the new American system apparently achieved. More critically, German tracking systems still required skilled operators to keep targets centered in the beam. The automatic tracking that the SCR-584 employed was beyond German capabilities. German engineers had considered such systems but concluded the servo control mechanisms would be too complex and unreliable for battlefield conditions. By March 1944, additional SCR-584 systems were spreading through Allied forces in Italy and being prepared for the Normandy invasion. The Luftwaffe began noticing increased anti-aircraft effectiveness wherever these new radars appeared. Aircraft losses climbed while successful bombing missions decreased. German bomber crews, once confident in their ability to conduct night operations with acceptable risk, now faced the prospect that Allied defenses could see and track them perfectly, regardless of weather or darkness. The German Technical Intelligence Organization, Forschungsamt, worked desperately to acquire details about the new American radar. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights attempted to photograph Allied anti-aircraft positions, hoping to identify the new equipment. Agents in neutral countries sought technical literature that might reveal specifications. Every downed Allied aircraft was searched for radar components that might provide clues. But the Americans and British had learned from Germany's capture of the Rotterdam H-2S radar in February 1943. They understood that captured equipment could reveal capabilities and vulnerabilities. Security around advanced radar systems was extraordinary. In June 1944, the SCR-584 faced its greatest test when Germany launched the Vosne flying bomb campaign against London. These cruise missiles, designated Vergeltungswaffe 1 or Vengeance Weapon 1, represented Hitler's promised retaliation for Allied bombing of German cities. Launched from sites across occupied France, the V-1s flew at speeds exceeding 300 miles per hour toward British targets. They were small, fast, pilotless, and extremely difficult to intercept. British defences initially struggled. The V-1s flew too fast for most propeller-driven fighters to catch, and conventional anti-aircraft fire achieved destruction rates below 20%. Something better was needed urgently. Prime Minister Winston Churchill authorized deployment of the complete American anti-aircraft system, SCR-584 radar, M9 gun director, 90mm guns, and proximity fuses. Together, these technologies would create the most lethal anti-aircraft system ever fielded. 20 SCR-584 systems were deployed along England's southern coast in defensive belts designed to engage V-1s as they crossed the Channel. The radar operators trained intensively on tracking the small, fast targets. The combination of automatic radar tracking, continuous fire control computation, and proximity-fused shells that exploded near the target transformed the engagement. Within weeks, destruction rates climbed from 17% to over 70%. On August 28, 1944, the last day Germany launched V-1s, before Allied ground forces overran the launching sites, 104 missiles were sent toward Britain. The SCR-584 anti-aircraft batteries shot down 64. Fighters accounted for 14 more. Only 4 missiles reached London. The defensive system had achieved a 96% success rate. For German observers who understood these statistics, the implications were devastating. The Vone program had consumed enormous resources. Thousands of missiles had been manufactured. Hundreds of launch sites had been constructed across France. The weapon represented one of Germany's most sophisticated technological achievements, combining pulse jet propulsion with gyroscopic guidance. Yet Allied defensive systems had rendered it ineffective through superior radar fire control. German engineers had spent years developing the Vone. Allied engineers had needed only weeks to create a defense that destroyed the weapons faster than they could be launched. The D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, included 39 SCR-584 systems among the forces landing in Normandy. Their mission was to provide air defense for vulnerable beachheads against the expected Luftwaffe response. German aircraft attempting to attack Allied forces during the critical first days found themselves facing devastating anti-aircraft fire that tracked them relentlessly through clouds, darkness, and evasive maneuvers. The Luftwaffe had already been weakened by years of attrition. The SCR-584 made what remained of German air power even less effective, protecting the invasion forces during their most vulnerable period. As Allied forces advanced across France in summer and fall 1944, the SCR-584 demonstrated capabilities beyond anti-aircraft fire. The radar could detect ground vehicles at ranges exceeding 20 kilometers. It could track artillery shells in flight, providing precise data on trajectories that allowed American gunners to calculate enemy battery positions for counter-battery fire. It could guide tactical aircraft to targets with accuracy that previous systems could not achieve. The single system served multiple roles, all supported by the fundamental capability to see clearly through darkness, weather, and smoke using microwave radiation. German forces facing American advances began encountering this technology regularly. Anti-aircraft batteries that had once provided effective defense against Allied aircraft suddenly found themselves outmatched by systems they could barely comprehend. German radar warning receivers designed to detect Allied radar emissions often failed to alert crews to the SCR-584's presence. The frequency and modulation were outside the range German equipment had been designed to detect. Aircraft approaching what appeared to be weakly defended positions would suddenly come under precisely aimed fire with no warning. Oberst Dietrich Schwenker, commanding a flak regiment defending approaches to the Rhine in late 1944, filed reports that captured German frustration. His 88mm anti-aircraft, guns, among the finest in the world, were being systematically neutralized by American aircraft. Guided by radar, his men could neither detect nor evade. American counter-battery fire, directed by the same radar systems, was destroying his gun positions with uncanny accuracy. His radar warning systems provided no useful data. His guns, designed to engage aircraft within visual range or illuminated by searchlights, could not compete with systems that tracked automatically at ranges where targets remained invisible. "We are fighting with equipment designed for the last war," Schwenker wrote in December 1944. "The Americans deploy technology we cannot match. Their radar sees what ours cannot. Their fire control computes solutions faster than our best-trained crews. Their integration of radar and guns creates a system that operates as a single entity, while our systems remain separate components that must be manually coordinated. This is not a matter of training or courage. It is a matter of technology we do not possess." The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 brought German forces into even more direct confrontation with SCR-584 capabilities. Hitler's final offensive in the West depended on poor weather that would ground Allied air superiority. The plan assumed that German forces could maneuver and fight effectively under cloud cover that had historically provided protection from air attack and reconnaissance. The offensive initially succeeded due to tactical surprise and overwhelming local force concentration. But as American forces recovered and organized defensive lines, the SCR-584 systems proved their worth in ways German planners had not anticipated. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. During the first several days of the offensive, heavy fog, snow, and low clouds indeed grounded most Allied aircraft. German commanders felt confident that weather provided the cover they needed to advance without facing devastating air attacks. What they failed to anticipate was that the SCR-584 could guide tactical aircraft even in conditions where visual flight was impossible. The radar provided precise target locations and navigation guidance, allowing aircraft to attack German columns through cloud cover that would have protected them from conventional air operations. More critically, the SCR-584 directed American artillery with unprecedented accuracy. German tank columns advancing through the Ardennes found themselves under precisely targeted fire that tracked them even through dense forest and heavy weather. Counter-battery fire located and destroyed German artillery positions within minutes of them opening fire, as the SCR-584 tracked shell trajectories back to their source. The defensive lines around Bastogne and other critical positions benefited from fire control that functioned perfectly regardless of visibility. General George Patton's relief of Bastogne demonstrated another SCR-584 capability, as Third Army units wheeled north from their positions in Alsace, covering over 100 miles in terrible weather. The radar systems provided air traffic control and target coordination that allowed maximum effectiveness, despite conditions that should have prevented coordinated operations. German forces, attempting to block Patton's advance, found themselves unable to concentrate without being detected and attacked through the weather that was supposed to protect them. The psychological impact on German troops was profound. Soldiers who had been told that bad weather would give them advantage instead found themselves more vulnerable than in clear conditions. At least in good weather, they could see attacking aircraft and attempt evasive maneuvers. In fog and snow, death arrived without warning, guided by invisible electromagnetic beams they could neither see nor counter. The sense of helplessness was complete. By January 1945, as Allied forces compressed the German bulge and restored the front lines, German commanders understood they had lost not just this offensive but any remaining hope of strategic success. The Battle of the Bulge had been Germany's last major offensive capability in the West. It had failed not primarily due to lack of fuel or reserves, though both were critical factors, but because American technology had rendered German tactical advantages obsolete. Weather no longer provided concealment. Darkness no longer protected movement. The electromagnetic domain had become as important as traditional military factors, and in that domain, Germany was comprehensively outmatched. Intelligence reports from German prisoners captured during the Bulge confirmed the technological despair spreading through Wehrmacht ranks. A panzer officer captured near Bastogne told his interrogators that German tankers had nicknamed the American radar systems Schwarze Hexerei, black witchcraft. They understood American guns were being directed by some form of radio equipment, but the precision and reliability seemed supernatural. Tanks could not hide in forests. Infantry could not conceal themselves in towns. Artillery positions were detected and destroyed before completing more than a few fire missions. Everything German tactical doctrine relied upon for survival had been negated. By February 1945, as Allied forces prepared to cross the Rhine and advance into Germany itself, the SCR-584 had become ubiquitous throughout American and British forces. Over 1,700 systems had been produced, equipping anti-aircraft batteries, artillery units, and forward air control stations across Europe and the Pacific. The original production target of 1,470 systems had been exceeded due to demand driven by combat success. Factories that had produced Chrysler automobiles before the war now churned out radar systems around the clock. The production story itself revealed American industrial capabilities that Germany could not match. Chrysler Corporation's Dodge division had led manufacturing, producing systems at peak rates of over 20 per day. Each SCR-584 required thousands of precision components: vacuum tubes from Sylvania, servo motors from multiple suppliers, parabolic reflectors machined to exacting specifications, transmitters, receivers, power supplies, cables, and displays. The supply chain integrated over 100 companies across the United States, coordinated with extraordinary efficiency to maintain production despite wartime material shortages. German industry, by contrast, struggled to produce sufficient quantities of conventional equipment. The Würzburg radar, Germany's most advanced gun-laying system, achieved total production of approximately 4,000 units across all variants during the entire war. The SCR-584 reached over half that total in less than 2 years of production, while simultaneously being superior in almost every technical specification. The disparity in industrial capacity and organizational efficiency was as significant as the technological gap. What German technical intelligence managed to learn about the SCR-584 through interrogations and captured documents deepened their understanding of how comprehensively they had been outpaced. The system employed automatic tracking using conical scanning, a technique German engineers had discussed theoretically but dismissed as too complex for reliable battlefield use. The integration with the M9 gun director created a closed-loop fire control system where radar detection led automatically to firing solutions without human intervention beyond loading ammunition. The reliability, reportedly exceeding 90% operational availability, even in harsh field conditions, exceeded anything German systems achieved. The operating frequency around 10 centimeters wavelength provided resolution and accuracy that German radars could not match. The Würzburg operated at 53 centimeters, providing much broader beam width and lower angular accuracy. Even the improved Würzburg Riese with its 7-meter dish could not achieve the precision of the SCR-584's 2-meter antenna. The American system detected bomber-sized targets at approximately 40 miles range and could automatically track them within 18 miles. Range accuracy was 25 yards. Angular accuracy was 0.06 degrees, equivalent to 1 milliradian. These specifications exceeded German capabilities by an order of magnitude in most parameters. Perhaps most concerning was the integration philosophy. German radar systems operated as separate components requiring skilled coordination. A Freya would detect targets at long range and hand them off to a Würzburg for tracking. The Würzburg would feed data to gun directors that calculated firing solutions. Each step required human operators and introduced delays and errors. The SCR-584 combined detection, tracking, and fire control into a single integrated system where transitions happened automatically at electronic speeds. One radar operator could manage the entire engagement from initial detection through final destruction of the target. German engineers examining reports of the SCR-584's performance realized that even if they could replicate the technology, which was doubtful given material shortages and production constraints, they could not deploy it in meaningful quantities before the war ended. The United States had not merely developed better radar, they had developed better radar, integrated it with better computers, produced it in overwhelming quantities, trained thousands of operators, and deployed it wherever it was needed. The systemic advantages were insurmountable. In March 1945, as Allied forces crossed the Rhine and advanced into the German heartland, Luftwaffe resistance became increasingly sporadic. Aircraft losses to American anti-aircraft fire had become prohibitive. The few remaining experienced pilots reported that approaching American positions meant facing tracking that was perfect, fire that was immediate, and destruction that was nearly certain. German jet aircraft, the Me-262 and R-2-34, represented technological achievements that should have provided advantages, but speed alone could not compensate for perfect tracking and proximity-fused shells. Several jets were shot down by SCR-584 directed fire, proving that technological superiority in one domain could not overcome comprehensive superiority across multiple domains. The final German assessment of Allied radar capabilities came not from technical intelligence but from operational reality. In April 1945, as resistance collapsed and the Third Reich entered its death throes, a Luftwaffe technical intelligence report prepared for Göring's headquarters concluded that the Allies had achieved radar capabilities approximately 5 years ahead of German development. More critically, the Americans had demonstrated industrial capacity to produce advanced technology at scales Germany could never approach even in peacetime, much less while under strategic bombing and with critical material shortages. The report noted that a single American radar system, the SCR-584, had been produced in larger quantities than Germany's entire radar program across all types. The integration of radar with analog computers, proximity fuses, and automated fire control created weapon systems whose effectiveness exceeded anything German engineering had achieved or could achieve within the war's timeframe. The assessment concluded that Germany had not lost individual battles due to tactical errors. Germany had lost the war because Allied technology, particularly American technology, had advanced beyond German ability to counter or match it. For individual German soldiers experiencing these systems in combat, the technological gap translated into daily encounters with their own obsolescence. A panzer commander reported that his tank, armed with the formidable 88mm gun and protected by armor that could defeat most Allied tank rounds, felt helpless against enemies who could see his position from beyond visual range and call down artillery fire before his crew could react. An infantry officer described trying to move his company at night through terrain that should have provided concealment, only to have American artillery arrive within minutes of their movement, guided by radar that detected them through darkness and vegetation. Luftwaffe pilots who survived long enough to gain experience reported that the hardest lesson was accepting that courage and skill no longer mattered as they once had. A pilot could execute perfect evasive maneuvers, but the tracking radar followed every movement. Anti-aircraft fire adjusted automatically, creating kill zones the pilot could not evade. The proximity fuses meant shells no longer needed direct hits. Passing within lethal range was sufficient. Survival became primarily a function of luck rather than ability. The interrogation centers where captured German personnel provided this information operated with surprising sophistication. At Fort Hunt, Virginia, designated simply as P.O. Box 1142, American military intelligence processed over 3,400 German prisoners between 1942 and 1945. Many interrogators were German Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi persecution and possessed native fluency in German language and culture. They understood precisely how to extract information without physical coercion. The interrogation philosophy emphasized making prisoners comfortable rather than frightened. Prisoners received good medical treatment, decent food, and sometimes even recreation. Interrogators like Rudolf Pins built rapport by appearing sympathetic to the prisoner's situation while subtly guiding conversation toward militarily useful topics. The approach proved extraordinarily effective. German prisoners, relieved to be safely out of combat and impressed by American material abundance, often volunteered information that traditional harsh interrogation would never have obtained. What emerged from these interrogations was not merely tactical intelligence about unit dispositions or equipment specifications, though such information proved valuable. More significant was the psychological portrait of German military personnel confronting American technological superiority. Captured officers and enlisted men consistently described feelings of technological inadequacy when facing Allied systems like the SCR-584. They understood intellectually that Germany was being defeated by industrial capacity and scientific achievement as much as by military force. A Luftwaffe radar technician captured in January 1945, interrogated at Fort Hunt, provided detailed assessment of German awareness of Allied radar capabilities. He confirmed that German signals intelligence had identified the SCR-584 as operating in the microwave range around 3 GHz, corresponding to 10 cm wavelength. German engineers understood the system employed automatic tracking and integration with fire control computers. What they could not replicate was the manufacturing quality and production scale. Even if Germany developed equivalent technology, producing it in quantities sufficient to matter was impossible given industrial constraints and strategic bombing damage. The technician explained that German radar warning receivers had eventually been modified to detect the SCR-584's emissions, with systems like the Naxos entering service in late 1943 and 1944. But these countermeasures arrived too late and provided only warning, not protection. Detecting that an American radar was tracking your aircraft gave you knowledge that you were about to die but provided no effective means of escape. The psychological burden of knowing you were being tracked perfectly, while unable to prevent the inevitable attack, was devastating to pilot morale. Another prisoner, a Panzer Grenadier officer who had fought through the Bulge, described German soldiers' reactions to American artillery directed by the SCR-584. He explained that German troops had learned through bitter experience to recognize when American fire was radar-directed versus conventionally aimed. Radar-directed fire arrived more quickly, adjusted more precisely, and achieved destruction with fewer rounds. Units caught in such fire could only attempt to scatter and hope the targeting priorities shifted elsewhere. Conventional defensive measures, like taking cover or returning fire, proved useless against an enemy who saw through darkness and calculated firing solutions automatically. The cumulative intelligence picture that emerged from these interrogations confirmed what Allied commanders already suspected. German forces understood they were technologically outmatched and saw no path to closing the gap within the war's remaining timeframe. This knowledge influenced German morale profoundly. Soldiers who believed their side possessed superior equipment and training could maintain fighting spirit even during tactical defeats. Soldiers who understood their equipment was inferior and their efforts ultimately futile fought with resignation rather than conviction. By April 1945, as Germany's collapse accelerated, interrogations at Fort Hunt and other Allied facilities began, including German scientists and engineers captured during the final advances. These individuals provided technical assessments that confirmed the SCR-584's significance within the broader context of Allied technological advantages. A radar engineer from Telefunken, one of Germany's primary radar manufacturers, admitted that German microwave radar development had lagged approximately 4 to 5 years behind Allied capabilities. He attributed this gap to multiple factors. Germany had pursued different technological priorities, investing heavily in jet aircraft and rocket development, while Allied forces focused more resources on radar and electronics. Germany lacked adequate supplies of certain critical materials, particularly the specialized alloys and rare earth elements needed for high-performance magnetrons. Most critically, Allied strategic bombing had disrupted German electronics production and research, destroying facilities and forcing frequent relocations that impeded systematic development. The engineer noted that German scientists had been aware of cavity magnetron technology through published research before the war, but had pursued alternative approaches that proved less effective. When captured, British H-2S radar in February 1943 revealed the cavity magnetron's practical success. German efforts to replicate it encountered insurmountable obstacles. Precision machining to create the resonant cavities required manufacturing capabilities and tolerances that German industry struggled to achieve consistently. Material shortages meant that even when prototypes succeeded, production at scale remained impossible. This engineer's assessment captured a critical reality. Germany had not merely lost individual technological races. Germany had fallen behind comprehensively across multiple related technologies that required integration to achieve operational effectiveness. The SCR-584 exemplified this integration, combining microwave radar with analog computing, servo control systems, precision manufacturing, and organizational competence to create a system whose whole exceeded the sum of its parts. Even if Germany had matched any single component, lacking the others would have prevented replicating the capability. The post-war technical intelligence assessments compiled by Allied forces confirmed these conclusions with exhaustive documentation. American and British teams combing through captured German records, interrogating personnel, and examining equipment found that German radar development had indeed produced sophisticated systems within their own technological framework. The Würzburg radar was an excellent design for its generation of technology. German engineers had shown considerable ingenuity in developing variants and improvements using available resources. But the fundamental technological generation gap meant German improvements could not close the advantage Allied systems possessed. Statistical analysis of combat effectiveness provided quantitative confirmation of the SCR-584's impact. Before deployment of microwave gun-laying radar, Allied anti-aircraft units required approximately 2,000 shells to achieve one aircraft kill, with success rates varying dramatically based on weather and visibility conditions. After widespread deployment of the SCR-584 integrated with M9 directors and proximity fuses, the ratio improved to approximately 100 shells per kill in many engagements. Against Von flying bombs, destruction rates exceeded 70% during favorable periods, compared to under 20% with earlier technology. These improvements translated into significant operational advantages throughout the final year of the war. German air operations over Allied-controlled territory became prohibitively costly. The Luftwaffe, already weakened by attrition and fuel shortages, could no longer accept the casualty rates that resulted from encountering SCR-584 protected positions. Areas covered by the radar systems became effectively no-fly zones for German aircraft, except during desperate missions, where losses were accepted as inevitable. The system's versatility multiplied its strategic value. Beyond anti-aircraft roles, the SCR-584 guided close air support missions, tracked artillery for counter-battery fire, detected ground vehicle movements, and provided air traffic control in forward areas. Military planners had designed it as a gun-laying radar, but combat experience revealed capabilities that transformed it into a multi-role sensor system. The ability to track artillery shells in flight particularly impressed German prisoners who understood the implications. An anti-aircraft radar that could detect and track projectiles traveling at supersonic velocities demonstrated sensitivity and processing speed that exceeded anything in German arsenals. The legacy of the SCR-584 extended far beyond World War II's conclusion. The system remained in American service through the Korean War, where updated versions continued, providing effective air defense. The Soviet Union developed derivative systems based on captured examples, with the Son-9 fire can, Son-30 fire wheel, and Son-50 flap wheel radars, all showing clear lineage to the American design. This technology transfer occurred through espionage, with American engineer Morton Sobel convicted of stealing SCR-584 plans and providing them to Soviet intelligence. The technology American engineers had developed to defeat Germany and Japan became tools in the Cold War confrontation. The engineering knowledge gained from developing the SCR-584 influenced post-war American defense technology profoundly. Engineers who worked on the radar system at MIT Radiation Laboratory went on to careers throughout the electronics industry, carrying expertise in microwave engineering, automatic control systems, and systems integration. The Bell Labs team that developed the M9 gun director applied analog computing techniques to numerous post-war applications. The manufacturing expertise Chrysler and other companies gained in producing precision electronic systems at scale enabled America's post-war electronics boom. Even decades after the war, SCR-584 hardware found unexpected applications. In 1995, meteorologists adapted the antenna pedestal for the first Doppler-on-wheels mobile weather radar. The robust mechanical design, engineered to withstand combat conditions, proved ideal for tornado research requiring deployable systems operating in extreme weather. This radar pedestal, designed in 1941 to track German bombers, enabled scientists to create the first detailed maps of tornado wind fields, discovering phenomena like hurricane boundary layer rolls that advanced atmospheric science significantly. For the German soldiers and engineers who encountered the SCR-584 during the war, the experience represented a moment of technological revelation with profound implications. They had entered the conflict confident in German engineering superiority, believing that discipline, tactical skill, and advanced weapons would overcome Allied numerical advantages. The reality proved devastating to that confidence. Allied technology, particularly American technology, had not merely matched German capabilities. It had surpassed them decisively across multiple critical domains. The SCR-584 exemplified this superiority not through any single revolutionary innovation, but through comprehensive excellence across every aspect of the system. The microwave radar was superior, the automatic tracking was superior, the fire control computer was superior, the manufacturing quality was superior, the production scale was superior, the operational doctrine was superior, the training was superior, the maintenance and logistics were superior. At every level, from fundamental physics through industrial production to tactical employment, the American system exceeded German capabilities. This realization shattered assumptions that had sustained German military morale through years of increasingly difficult fighting. German propaganda had consistently promoted images of American soldiers as weak, poorly trained, and dependent on material superiority to compensate for lack of fighting spirit. German technical propaganda had portrayed American equipment as crude but numerous, quantity over quality. The SCR-584 and similar systems revealed both narratives as false. American equipment represented sophisticated engineering executed at scale that German industry could not approach. The psychological impact extended beyond individual soldiers to influence post-war German technical culture. Engineers who had worked on German radar programs during the war carried with them understanding that their wartime assumptions about technological superiority had been fundamentally wrong. This influenced how post-war West German industry approached technology development, fostering attitudes that emphasized learning from American methods rather than assuming German approaches were inherently superior. The humbling experience of technological defeat shaped post-war attitudes toward innovation and international cooperation. For American military planners, the SCR-584 demonstrated principles that would guide Cold War defense development. Advanced technology, produced at scale, integrated into effective systems, and deployed with proper training and doctrine, could provide advantages that overcame numerical inferiority and compensated for geographic disadvantages. The lesson was not lost on Soviet observers, who invested heavily in their own radar development programs while simultaneously pursuing espionage to acquire Western technology. The electromagnetic warfare domain had been recognized as critical to modern military operations. The human cost of this technological competition remained starkly apparent throughout the war's final months. German aircrews continued flying despite knowing their missions would likely end in death. Ground forces continued fighting despite understanding their equipment was inferior. The courage required to fight under such circumstances deserves recognition, even as we acknowledge that courage alone could not overcome systematic technological disadvantage. Men died because their nation had fallen behind in scientific knowledge, industrial capacity, and systems engineering. No amount of bravery could compensate for radar that could not see, computers that did not exist, and production facilities that could not manufacture advanced systems at necessary scales. By May 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, over 1,700 SCR-584 systems had been deployed across European and Pacific theaters. They had shot down thousands of aircraft, protected countless ships and ground positions, guided successful airstrikes through weather that should have prevented operations, and demonstrated technological superiority so comprehensive that enemy forces understood resistance was ultimately futile. The radar system that had first seen combat at Anzio in February 1944 had helped win the war in Europe within 15 months of deployment. The story of the SCR-584 is ultimately a story about how wars are won through systematic application of science, engineering, and industrial organization. Individual battles may be decided by courage, tactics, or luck, but total wars between modern industrial powers are decided by which side can innovate faster, produce more effectively, and integrate technology into operational doctrine more successfully. The German soldiers who faced this radar system understood they were experiencing their own obsolescence, rendered irrelevant not through any failure of courage but through comprehensive technological defeat. When German engineers examined captured SCR-584 components and documentation after encounters with the system, they performed an autopsy on their own technological assumptions. Every specification confirmed what combat experience had already demonstrated. The Allies, particularly the Americans, had developed and deployed radar capabilities that Germany could neither match nor effectively counter. The automatic tracking mechanism that German engineers had dismissed as too complex for reliable battlefield use operated with 90% availability in combat conditions. The integration with fire control computers that German doctrine had not prioritized created lethality that rendered German aircraft unable to operate wherever the system was deployed. Most significantly, the production scale that had generated over 1,700 complete systems, each containing thousands of precision components, demonstrated industrial capabilities that Germany simply did not possess. American factories were producing more of a single advanced radar type than Germany produced of all radar types combined. The lesson was inescapable. Technological sophistication meant nothing without the industrial capacity to produce it, the organizational competence to deploy it, and the systematic approach to integrate it into effective operational doctrine. The examination of the SCR-584 revealed to German technical personnel not just that they had lost a technology race, but that they had been competing in a race whose rules they had misunderstood. They had pursued individual technical achievements, developing advanced equipment that worked well within German technological frameworks. The Allies had pursued systemic excellence, creating integrated systems where technology, doctrine, training, production, and logistics combined to produce capabilities that far exceeded the sum of individual components. Germany had built excellent cars. America had built entire transportation systems. This understanding came too late to influence the war's outcome, but early enough to shape how survivors thought about the defeat. The war had not been lost because German soldiers lacked courage or skill. The Eastern Front had demonstrated extraordinary German tactical competence under impossible conditions. The war had been lost because German industry, science, and organization could not match Allied counterparts, while simultaneously fighting on multiple fronts against opponents with greater resources. The SCR-584 served as tangible proof of this disparity, a single system that embodied everything Germany had lost the capacity to produce. In the decades following the war, veterans from both sides occasionally gathered at reunions and historical symposia. German veterans who had faced SCR-584 directed fire often expressed a kind of grim respect for the system's effectiveness. They described the helplessness of being perfectly tracked, the fatalism of knowing evasion was impossible, the resignation that came from understanding that technology had rendered their training and experience largely irrelevant. Some noted with dark humor that at least the radar-directed fire was more accurate, killing quickly rather than through prolonged uncertainty. Others simply acknowledged that they had survived primarily through luck, being in positions the radar operators had not prioritized when more important targets were available. American veterans who operated the systems expressed professional satisfaction with equipment that had performed reliably under difficult conditions. Radar operators described the almost eerie precision of watching targets appear on their scopes, locking tracking automatically, watching the M9 compute firing solutions, and then observing targets disappear as shells found their marks. The integration was so complete that the system felt almost autonomous once activated, with human operators primarily providing target selection and system oversight rather than continuous manual control. It was, as one operator described it, a glimpse of the automated warfare that would dominate future conflicts. The technical documentation preserved from the SCR-584 program provided invaluable resources for post-war radar development. Engineers studying these records could trace design decisions, understand compromises between competing requirements, and analyze how integration challenges had been overcome. The program demonstrated that revolutionary capabilities emerged not from single breakthrough inventions, but from systematic excellence across every aspect of development, production, and deployment. This lesson influenced how subsequent American defense programs approached complex systems, emphasizing integration and producibility from initial design rather than treating them as afterthoughts. For military historians, the SCR-584 represents a case study in how technology alters warfare's fundamental character. The system changed the tactical equation for air operations, making aircraft vulnerable in ways that no defensive doctrine could compensate for. It enabled ground forces to operate with confidence against air attack, knowing their positions could be effectively defended. It demonstrated that the electromagnetic spectrum had become as important a battle space as land, sea, and air. These lessons shaped Cold War military doctrine and continue influencing how modern militaries think about electromagnetic warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.